It's very food. All right. I'd like to call the pre-K, pre-ref building committee meeting to order. Today's Wednesday, November 19th, 2025, 6 o'clock, 6:30. Can we start off with a roll call, please?
Randy Daigle,
Here.
Gina LeBlanc.
Here.
Christine DeBoni,
Here.
Lauren Andrews,
Here.
Gina Sakala.
Here.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Bob Crisati,
Here.
Janet Cushman. Here. John Digg. Kate Flanagan.
Here.
Steve Macchio.
Here.
Amanda Pickett.
Here.
Charlotte Riley. Scott Ryder.
Here.
Jacqueline Valley.
Here.
Jeff Wazinski.
Here.
Justin Hopkins.
Here.
Antonia.
Here.
And Chris Sigley.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, we have some new faces this evening. Can we introduce ourselves and who and what we are?
Oh, me first? Oh, sure. Danielle Gerard, newly elected Board of Education member, and I will be on the pre-ref committee. So, yeah.
Now, before you leave, if you can give
Yeah.
Ellen your email.
Yep. Yeah, we just decided all the.
I was gonna say, so I'll just
recently.
candidly say out loud, and this is maybe an awkward moment, there's been an election, so this committee is interestingly designed. So I was expecting that tonight's meeting would be canceled because we just literally started and I'm not sure how we're adjusting membership. So Danielle's here in case membership has to adjust. So I'm just putting it out there.
Okay. Keep going.
Dean Gauss, also newly elected to the Board of Ed. Newly re-elected.
Yeah.
You were there.
You were there.
I was there before.
Yeah.
Okay. We know everybody else, so. We have a special guest this evening. Care to introduce yourself and then we can go through.
Sure, I'm Mike Zuba with MP Planning Group. We're doing the enrollment projections to help support this project.
I'm excited for this.
So tonight is actually a very important meeting. The information that's going to be given tonight is extremely needed and extremely important. This is going to dictate the design and the future of these buildings and the town. Without beating a dead horse, we can move right on to the architect's presentation and then you can roll on anywhere you want, sir.
Thank you, Randy. Good evening, everybody. Jeff Wazinski, principal at Tecton Architects. Two handouts. Our handout is the green printout. That is the update since our last meeting. And then you have Mike Zuba's report, which is a bit of an eye test because we printed 4 slides on 1 page. But Mike's going to walk through that entire presentation in just a few minutes. Just for an agenda for this evening, just want to update everybody on some of the recent activities. We had our think tanks today and just concluded with the second meeting with the community by invite. So we had a good, I think, good participation, good attendance, so we can go over those. The large majority of the time that we want to spend tonight is on Mike's presentation, so we're going to keep it pretty brief. Then with time permitting, we can go back into some of the options. We have a few summary slides on how Mike's work may impact what we're doing and how it relates to some of the numbers and options that we were showing you on all the previous meetings. Do want to round out on the community engagement communications because we do have that next community conversation coming up in December 17th. It's virtual. I know it's a busy time of year, but we're in a really important part of our work. And then just talk a little bit about next steps. So where we are is basically just about halfway, a little more than halfway through our work. This is the schedule that we've presented at every meeting. So we're now into our 8th meeting with this group. And you can see by the green bar kind of in the middle of the slide, we're right in the middle point of the options planning. So right on schedule for our work with the proposed conclusion coming up in March, early spring. So I mentioned the think tanks. There's some printouts of the activities that we conducted earlier today. Down on the far end of the table, That will certainly help us, some of the feedback that we received will certainly help us refine the options as we move forward. Just to summarize the 4 buckets of work that we have been working on. Mike's here again for the demographic and enrollment. We've already conducted the infrastructure assessment. We've had many conversations relative to the educational programming, and we're continuing with our community engagement. So those 4 components helped us with the planning options in the master plan overall. Just again, big picture, this plan is going to be a very generational plan, several generations, and really shape the future of education in the town of Enfield. So these 2 slides, I think, might be new to this group. We included them in the community conversation. I think they're good graphics to have in your file, so I'm not going to go over each of the dates, but takeaway on this slide is the age and date in which the buildings were actually constructed, when the restructure to K235 came into fruition or came into place, which is 2011. And then some of the activities since that point. The next slide just shows basically where we're at with our work, Tecton and the consultant team's work. Obviously, you've been at this much longer than we have, since basically 2021, 22, with all of the various different studies. So big picture, we're right where we need to be with our schedule. Bigger picture is whatever options, and assuming the community supports this, we're talking, plans all the way out to 2032, 33. So just again, bigger picture. Really good engagement with our think tanks earlier. If we have time to go over those activities, we will, and some of the kind of key feedback items that we had. Without further ado, it's okay, Mike, I'm going to switch over to because I'm sharing my screen for recording purposes. Is it okay? Did you want to just walk through each of these slides, or what's your preference?
As long as he keeps going with your. Yeah, as long as you kind of keep up with me advancing.
You tell me,
yep. I think it's easier if I advance, but if you want to, if it's shared via the video, then I understand totally.
It is.
I can't ask me that.
You want to come sit here?
Do you want to switch?
We could do musical chairs? Sure, why not?
They're on wheels.
No problem.
Just roll right around.
Just moving around, that's my third chair of the night, you
All right.
know?
I think it's this is Bluebeam, yeah, down by.
Yeah, all right, you got it.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everybody. So for tonight's presentation, I know that we have a ton of information in here. I know you also have, some other items to discuss. So I'm going to really kind of touch on the most salient points, but if there's something that you want me to unpack deeper and get into more detail on it, I'm happy to do so. I'll touch on what I think are the major highlights. We did do a deep dive for this one. Typically, when we do enrollment projections as part of school facility planning, master planning, and ultimately construction grant applications, we really like to dig in there and get into a lot of different elements and details to give you the information that you need for important decision making. So kind of looking at our introduction, this is kind of standard of, it's done in compliance with the Office of Grants Administration requires for enrollment projections. The only thing that it'll change if you decide to change the number of schools, size of schools, any of that will have to re-aggregate and retabulate the data so it matches up with what's going to be in the construction grant application and ultimately the ed specs for the projects that are going to go into the state. So we always like to start with enrollment drivers. That's really kind of everything that's impacting students within your community. That's births, that's turnover, that's housing, that's immigration, that's enrollment factors as well, kind of then leading into our overall trends analysis and then getting right into the enrollment projections themselves. So starting with our demographics and housing, we always like to go big picture first, looking at the total population, and Enfield's population peaked way back in 1990 at just over 45,000. Over the last 2 census, we've seen declines there with a steeper decline in the 2020 census. We do know that there was limitations to the 2020 census and that it was fielded at the same time that the onset of the pandemic. So not all the movement in and out of communities were captured during that fielding, but the Connecticut Department of Public Health has been issuing annual estimates to kind of bridge those gaps over the last several years. What we'll see in that far bar chart, the darker one to the far right, is the 2024 CTDPH estimate of just over 41,140 residents in town. So still a declining population overall. Getting into our demographic makeup as a whole, and it's kind of interesting doing this all over the state and in different parts of the Northeast. A lot of that population tree you'll see on the right is very similar, where we start to see shrinking population, especially those younger adults and teens into your early 20 years, and then we start to see a decline in those older adults, 40 to 54 years old, and we look at our senior population and 55 plus and 65 and on. That's really where we're seeing a lot of the growth in many of our communities. Our communities are kind of fit for those that are aging in place. And when you start to see a population tree where you have growth in those that are 55 plus, especially those in that 60 to 70 age band, that's where we start to see our median age increasing in our communities. Based on the 2020 census, the median age in Enfield is 42 years. That's +5 from the 2010 census. So the community continues to age in place. But we did see some modest increases in those 30 to 39-year-olds. So those young adults, those are individuals that are either looking to start a family, settling down with their first home, or having kids that are likely to start entering the school system.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, I'm a questioner.
Sure.
Because this data I think is interesting as we're an aging community, but it's not, to my understanding, that we have like 55 and older housing. It's just that we have lots of people who are in homes that are dying and aging out of them and being bought by young families. So is that included in kind of how you project this? Like these houses turning over to not be green still, but to actually turn over to be in the red?
It is. I mean, we do look at that. We look at the opportunities in town, especially for those that may want to stay in the community but may not have housing type in the community that they want to move into. So we're seeing individuals are staying much longer in the homes that they've kind of raised their family in and they've retired in. And that's what's in part lagging some of the turnover in homes. Good question. Kind of disaggregating that data set a little bit more. This is one that we use quite frequently, kind of breaking down females of childbearing age. As you have an aging population, you also are having females aging out. So over the last 3 different census, you can see where that bar chart in the upper right, our overall females of childbearing age have been on the decline. It also corresponds with the period of declining births. So that's not really a huge surprise, but when we really start unpacking some of the data, we can start to see that we have growth in those 30 to 34 and 35 to 39-year-old cohorts. Collectively, it's about 26%. Those are the ones in Connecticut that also have the highest fertility rates. So even though we're losing some on the higher end of our females of childbearing age, we're gaining some on that middle part there and those that have the highest fertility rates. So that's where we begin to see some stability overall in our birth data. Getting right into the birth data. So the state of Connecticut couldn't just keep with calendar years. So for years, we would always project based on calendar years until last year. They decided to pass legislation and entry dates became September to August. So we have to now go ahead and disaggregate births based on birth month. So what you'll see is everything kind of shown to the left of that red box are calendar year births. Everything from 2019 on are our kindergarten classes from last year, this year, and beyond. Those are now based on the new calendar for kindergarten, which is September to August. It's still 12 months, so you only had that loss of 4 months in last year's K cohort. It's still 12 months going forward. It's just a different 12 months. But overall, when we look at this birth data, it's been really remarkably stable compared to some communities we work in over the last 5 years especially. We've been averaging about 380 births annually. stable birth cohorts overall. We ran different demographic and mathematical models because in order to develop 10 years of kindergarten projections, we need to also project 5 years of births. So you'll see the blue, the green, and the red that represents our low, medium, and high. So we do a different modeling for each of those birth projections based on different conditions. So we have a slightly higher birth model for the high projection model, but they're all kind of in line with what that recent trend is. It's fed by those females of childbearing age. And they're all kind of keeping that straight flat line, just at slightly different levels, whether it's the high at almost 390, the medium at 375, or the low at just above 360. We're required to put in the unemployment, but it doesn't really go into our modeling. The state likes to see it in the enrollment projections. I won't spend a lot of time on it unless you have any questions on that. I will talk more on home sales. Housing turnover is a good driver for enrollment overall, especially in communities that have a healthy single-family housing stock. I think things that jump out to us at the start of the pandemic, where we saw probably housing spikes that rivaled and exceeded that of the early 2000 housing boom in many communities. Enfield didn't see that. It was more subdued. You had a little bit of a bump up in housing overall with the peak of just under 690, but you didn't have the astronomical increase that we saw in many communities throughout the state. Over the last several years, this is consistent with many of the towns that we're working in. Starting in 2022, we started to see that decline in sales overall. And over the last 3 years, sales have been, right around that 550 or below mark, roughly 100 below that pre-pandemic level where you were at. And it's kind of weird using pre-pandemic as like a term of time, but for what we do, where we do the modeling and looking at the different factors, it really is one of those things that we look at for the baseline conditions. And within this number, we do have condo sales. They comprise less than 20%, actually 15% of your total sales. They haven't experienced any change really over the last several years.
Does this align with interest rates by any chance or not?
It does. It aligns with interest rates. It aligns with the next slide, Jeff, of the price increasing. So, we think, and it's all honestly related, right? When you look at 2019 and your median, not average, median sale price of a single family home was about $185,000. 2025 year to date through August, so it does capture the summer season, $325,000. So pretty dramatic increase overall, on par with what we're seeing across parts of the state. So about a 76% appreciation. So for those that bought before, congratulations. For those that are buying now, it makes it kind of rough, right? But we've also seen that same appreciation in condos. So I think that makes it a little bit of a challenge as well when you look at those different ownership housing options in your community and the prices increased, mortgage rates are higher, and inventory is lower. So all bits of challenges that cause a reduction in what we'll call kind of typical housing churn. So as homes are being turned over, and that was a good question earlier, older individuals are looking to sell, younger families move in. But right now, because we're at more of a subdued level, we're not seeing that housing churn of even where we were at prior to the pandemic. So that's something to, as a demographer, that's something we're modeling, but that's something that we don't see changing anytime soon in the next several years. So that's a condition that's likely going to persist for a while. Housing permits, so going through the DECD, Department of Economic and Community Development, they issue reports every year. Overall, you have some big spikes, obviously, and then you have some years that are down. But over the decade, you average about 44, 45 permits annually. When you factor in demolitions, comes out to about 35 or 36 of those units, with a majority of the units of multifamily, with only a small number, just 10 units as single-family developments. Working with the town planning department, they were awesome. Lori Whitman and her team there got us a lot of really good information and has been keeping up to date on kind of progress on some of the major projects. So this is kind of as fresh as it's going to get. We do know once we issue the report, then, other things happen and change, but this was a really good snapshot from a couple weeks ago of what's in what we'll call the housing pipeline. Where we really pay attention to is things that are approved project-wise, projects of scale, and projects that are under construction. We're also keeping an eye on the pending projects as well. So pending projects kind of don't pass that litmus test of being eminent yet. So they don't have site plan approval, they don't have local approval, they may have some elements in kind of in progress. So they may have some, zoning relief or zone changes to facilitate projects, but they're not eminent development. So when we really look at it, we kind of scrutinize it because in order for us to look at these developments and identify what's included in the baseline, what's not included in the baseline. So as part of the baseline, we talked about 44, 45 units annually. You look at a 10-year projection horizon, that puts us up around 450 units. So we really kind of look at that baseline and we say, okay, is our pipeline in excess of that, right? So our pipeline is in excess of that, so we have to make some adjustments by adding student multipliers and student generation multipliers to it. But we want to be sure that we're not double counting. So going through this list, we have a lot of the recent projects identified. I'm sure you've seen some of them either in the local news or just from talk around town. I think, some of them are fairly notable. Bright Meadows being one of them. That's at the Mass Mutual site. That's going to be a split of apartments and townhomes there. That's in the post-approval stage. Maplewood Village Apartments, about 170 units there. That's in the post-approval stage. Meadow Manor, about 40 units there. That's in construction, as well as Brainerd Gardens, which is one of the unique ones there. That's actually a single-family development. So for that one, we add different multipliers, which I'll talk about on the next slide. And then we have our pending projects, which the big one is the Enfield Mall. A recent adjustment has been made for that. I had an earlier version where they had zoning approval or zoning framework in place for more units. That's been scaled back a little bit, but it's still preliminary. They haven't had an official site plan approval yet or any of the master developer bringing on any other development or any of the site work approved for that yet. So that right now is not included in the projections. It's pending, but we do have numbers for it depending on how it ultimately shakes out. So that's something that bears watching. And then another project that's still in the pending category is the redevelopment of Nathan Hale, but that's going to be an age-restricted project, so there won't anticipate any students coming out of that.
Did they change Brainerd Gardens?
That's what I was just gonna ask.
Because
It was
it
supposed
used to be a
It was supposed
55
to be
older.
55 and over, but they're so high priced that they're not.
Yeah, they're not, that was my understanding, correct, that they're not moving, so it's opened up now, it's no longer an age
So
limit.
every time they put up the sign, this is 55+ community, they put tape over it, because they're now
But that's how it was
not
presented.
doing that.
Can you change
Yeah,
it?
but how do you change it after the town approves a 55 older community and now all of a sudden it's
Go
not?
back.
What's your P and Z?
You go back to planning and zoning.
I'm not gonna comment on that.
Is it true, though, that if the first purchase is over 55, then the community isn't over 55? No.
No,
So planning, all right.
It's how it goes through P and Z is what it's supposed to be,
yeah,
period.
Yeah, it's no longer 55+ exclusively.
But I don't know, did it go through you yet?
No, I'm on appeals, so I don't,
So don't blame me.
no.
Well, Steve has an appeal.
Yep.
Well, I get the question asked to me.
Mhm.
And the only answer I can give is, well, it said it on the sign, but it's crossed out. That makes me sound about as smart as,
That's yeah.
I mean, I can do that on my own. I don't need help from anybody.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. So in the projections that you have, you're not including the pending projects. So we have to keep them all somewhat in mind. And then my other wonder, it's very early in the stages, but I know we have an RFP out for the annex, and depending on what we get back and plans there, thinking about that too, that's not up here. So just some others.
Yeah, and I think the conversation we're having on this is perfect because we're always gonna have things that pop up. So we're trying to account for what we know now, and we're trying to buffer for that a little bit, but also in the development world, things change. And I think that's important to note as well, where a plan may come in and we're gonna do X number of units, it's gonna look like this, it stalls, a couple years later, it turns into something a little bit different. So when we build into our projections, we wanna ensure that the project is as close to being the project that was described to us if we're gonna include it in enrollment projections.
Other question I would have is, I know you have on here a number of units, but like for apartments and things like that, you get very different demographics that go in, if it's a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom apartment.
I didn't show all of that.
Okay.
I have it summarized, but I didn't want to blind everybody and get them all kind of lost in the sauce on all the details. But yeah, we understand like what that potential mix as was presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission was, but sometimes, once again, there's a couple other projects I'm working on in different towns where it was supposed to be a certain number of bedroom types, and it turned out to not be that because the market wasn't there for it.
Yeah, okay. All right.
But typically, what we're seeing, and I'll get it ahead on the next couple slides, a lot of it is gonna be more geared towards low bedroom counts, more market rate type of units, was the information that we got on it.
Thank you. Sorry. I'll stop.
Put your hand, one other question.
Go ahead, I didn't see a hand.
So I saw the North River, which is the Bigelow, but you don't have the South River property, the Levitts property. Did Lori talk to you about that at all?
It was not on my list.
All right.
Is that approved?
Well, it's
in the-
multi-phases and
Right,
it is in the approval. We're gonna call it in the pipeline, at whatever, stage it may or may not be. But I think that that's something that you should talk to them about. Listen, I don't know that all of these are gonna happen anyway, and God only knows what the final numbers are going to look like. So maybe one more development is not gonna make a big difference. But I will say, for me, I've been paranoid that we're gonna build buildings that aren't big enough. But, so I would just talk to them about South River Street.
I will do that. And I did do a deeper dive on all the units at Bigelow to look at the localized student generation out of there as well, which I'll touch on in a couple slides. So we took the existing attendance zones and then mapped out all of the developments just to kind of get an understanding of locationally, where are they at, how are they feeding into the schools. For this process, we built our projections around the existing schools, but this is a helpful map, especially if you're looking at sites and thinking about, where we're gonna have future school buildings at, just understanding of where some of the development pressures are within the community. This kind of pairs well with the map I had done earlier, which I'll get to, which shows the student density. So I think when you kind of like marry those two together, it really paints a good picture of where your population centers are and where you can see some impacts in the community are. So getting into our students from multifamily housing, so I've been doing demographics in Connecticut for about 25 years. I have a huge library of developments that we are constantly looking at tracking as part of projects and other client work. So it's always kind of building upon that. And then we have sources of information that we purchase through different vendors. Ecom Consult is one of them that does residential multipliers specific to Connecticut that we've had really good luck with. And I like to be able to put everything side by side. So I grabbed a sampling of, I think it was a half dozen developments in town, looked at the number of total units there, looked at the current enrollment. So address matched the kids, kind of put those digital push pins on a map, see which ones landed on the different developments. And then looked at what the student generation was for the current year out of each of those developments to get a good understanding of what we're likely going to see going forward in some of those other multifamily developments. So overall, for your K-12 students, it comes out to about 0.06 students per unit. Bigelow's up top there at 300 units. Current enrollment for K-12 at 26, so a little bit higher at almost 0.1. That's kind of where I expected it a little bit. And then we have this far right thing called NTD students. That's something that we do where we look at immigration there within the community. Those are new to district students. So just looking at a level of turnover and transiency for some of those different units. So overall, a little bit below kind of what we expected, but I think it's the nature of the units and the unit types. I then grabbed the sampling of multifamily from two of the other projects that I had at hand that we were recently working on, South Windsor and Glastonbury, looking at what some of those generation looked like. So the top one there was Evergreen Walk. That's something that I have many years of data on there. That came out to 0.2. So a little bit higher than what we're seeing locally, but when you look at the collection of those, about 300 occupied units and about 0.1 student per unit. So, you know, a little bit lower than what the demographic multiplier tells us to use, but we wanted to be conservative as part of this process, knowing that, you know, there's going to be school construction, and whenever there's school construction, it increases the desirability. So for all the multifamily units that were over 5+ units, so the ones of scale, about 0.22 students per unit overall. And then for single family, getting back to the age restricted, right? If it's not age restricted, we're expecting about 0.47 students per unit there for those types of, for that type of development, which is more of a attached townhome style. And then that single family at 0.59 overall. So the attached townhome would get paired up with the Mass Mutual. I think there was 165 units for townhomes there. And then the single family goes back into the age restricted development that got approved. So getting into our student generation, I break this down because we really focus on what's in excess of our baseline projection. And we know that in 10 years, we have about 450 units. So we cut that in, you know, roughly half and look at what that's going to be. So the full load for student generation would be about 130 elementary students or about 270 K-12 students. Based on the baseline development that has been happening, that gets cut down to about 140 or about 70 elementary students overall. And talking with planning and the likelihood of some of these projects going forward, not going forward, some of them have been dragging a little bit. We were conservative in looking at phasing them in. So we did a phase in starting in 27, 28 and spread that phase in all the way out to 33, 34 because some of the projects are complicated. Some of the projects have sat for a while. It's not like in some communities where we have a project, they came in, they're breaking ground, they're moving quickly. When we know that they're going to lease up, you know, in a very timely manner. We're being a little bit more cautious here, but I think the key point is the full impact kind of will still fall within that 8-year projection horizon for your construction grant application. So I was trying to balance both of those areas out within our projections. Getting into our enrollment trends and analysis, your peak enrollment from our data set going back 20 years is about 6,500 students. That enrollment has dropped to about 4,600 students based on 25, 26. You had a period where, you know, relative stability over the last 5 years up until this year where we did see a little bit of an enrollment decline. But overall, over the last 5 years, we saw elementary decline by about 7%, but about a 1,950 average. Middle school decline by about 15%, averaging 1,070, and high school declined by about 9%, averaging 1,525. And then we noted that pre-K has increased by about 60 students, currently based on October 1st enrollment at about 255. I like to always have this chart where it's just some simple conditional formatting. You can kind of see the waves of enrollment. The green represents those larger cohorts, especially some of your graduating classes 15 years ago, much greater than what they've been, you know, in the recent past. And then you can kind of look to the bottom left and look at your K1 to kind of your lower elementary cohorts now. You can see that they're much smaller than the cohorts that have preceded them. So what that tells us is that, you know, we're expecting kind of that wave of lower enrollment to work its way through, and where we need to be able to backfill for our projections is really through those housing immigration as well as the births that we're seeing within the community.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
And maybe this has been talked about. This is probably something that you guys can answer. What is the possibility or reality of people seeing we're getting these new schools and now families are like, wow, I'm really attracted to this. Now I want to move in, you know, move back into town and what have you. The possibility of enrollments going up.
It
We've seen
happened with the
we've-
high school and it happened with JFK.
And that's kind of like my thought. I mean, these are great, like, this is great to like look at, but then in reality, in, 5+ years from now, we look at this, we're gonna be like, people are, wow, these
Yeah.
new schools, this is awesome. This is new ability for us to come here and,
That's something we track as part of our work. And what we'll typically see is that we see an initial uptick,
Mhm.
but then it starts to wane.
Okay.
Is the truth of it. And it's a little bit more, you see it and it's a little bit more obvious when you only do one building in town.
Mm.
Right? Like if you just do one building, you start to see, oh, enrollment's increasing here, but it's decreasing here, right?
Yeah.
But if you do several of them, that's where you start to see enrollment kind of picking up. I've done enrollment projections for years in South Windsor, and they had a lot of factors at play. And they saw enrollment growth for various reasons there. Part of it's the new schools, part of it's the community, part of it's also their location in the region. But now they've gotten to a point where enrollment's now, especially the elementary, has kind of like flattened off, right?
Yeah.
But they're challenged with now those waves of elementary students moving up, and how much space do we need at the high school? So it's a great question. So knowing that and seeing that factor, we build into our model, especially when it's part of a construction program, a little bit of that growth as part of the baseline, to give it a little bit more growth there, knowing that that's going to happen in the first several years.
Can I ask a question? And though I'm from town, I'm not into all the new housing and knowing where the affordability is. The homes that you've used as a sampling are more, to me, represent the higher end of where apartments, multifamily homes are. When I look at this, then I look at other homes, and you're representing them at 1 to 2 children maybe coming in per family. Whereas there are other areas that aren't represented, so maybe that it was part of your pooling of numbers, but they're not represented in your sheets, such as Georgetown, who has 2, 3, 4 children living in a very small apartment, and they are much lower income, and the apartments there are, and those condos there are in the 150 to 65 range, as opposed to the 300 range. So people coming in are really looking for something that is truly affordable. So when we are projecting, are we really projecting about the affordability? And is it comparable when I'm looking at this, 1 to 2, as opposed to really 4 to 5 over here? And they're going to be looking for those homes as well.
And that's a very good question. So what's being built is more low bedroom, studio 1 and a couple 2s, and it's market rate. So it's not the affordable units that you would see in Georgetown and in the Housing Authority property, and some of the other properties. So we're basically using that as a comp for what's about to be built, not as a statement on what's the housing stock of the town. Those lower price point units will be there. They will have turnover. They'll still generate students like they're generating now. We're not going to stop that, but it's really the addition of what's being constructed is geared more towards smaller bedroom counts and higher price points, which typically don't generate students as much.
Yeah, I think, just to echo, I think Kate's concern is, and we can look at this year, last year in total, we had 92 or 93 students move into district, new to the district with IEPs. To date, this year, 73.
In a matter of 3 months.
So the folks that we have moving in, affordability-wise,
You have
73 additional.
They're going into the 1 bedroom with
New to the
3 kids.
district.
Right.
Significantly.
It's really represented.
So I think it's more of the apartments. And I don't know, I'm just speaking off but it's, the apartments are incredibly,
They're crowded.
well, that's, yeah. They're affordable for these families who have significant need,
Yep.
and they're stuffed full.
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing it from that end.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that this can't necessarily predict turnover, but it'd be interesting to know, like Georgetown, for example, over the course of the last 5-10 years, what have been the number of students within that, and I'm using that just because you used it.
Right,
Right.
What is the number of students that have come out of that and has it increased? And now if it hasn't increased, then it's
Well, and
just
I-
that they're going wherever they can find.
And I'm looking at it because, and I'm getting ahead of you, but when I looked at the SPED numbers and I'm looking and they're doubling and in a matter of 5 years, and you look at the ML numbers, the ELL students coming in, and that's tripling in 5 to 10 years. You're looking at that, and those are people who are migrating here for the lower incomes and the services that we provide. And then I look at, it's a big domino effect, because we're looking at smaller classroom sizes to support these kids, which means bigger needs within, and yet the housing isn't really, to me, reflecting what is coming, because based on what's here, because these are higher end housing. You know, most of these people aren't affording $300,000
Or
homes.
what our, you know, our ML learners are coming over and they're living with their sisters
Yes.
and they have 10 kids in a household and they're all coming to one school or they're splitting sister schools, you know. We're getting people that are coming in and living with their parents because they can't afford this $700,000 house is what it is. It's definitely impacting everything.
And I do live in a nice neighborhood in Enfield, and I have a neighbor who has 19 people living in their ranch. 19. And many of them are littles. 19 children total. And that's not an exaggeration.
In a
And
ranch?
that's how they're combined. And this doesn't reflect those things that are happening.
All right, so
Tina has.
I have a couple things. First of all, I appreciate, so when we hear all these apartment complexes are going up, it's really hard to quantify. So I appreciate your chart where you're kind of quantifying, you know, the average of kids, because in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? So I appreciate kind of having a number in my head for that. So one of the things actually Lauren and I had been talking about is we're so disproportionate in the amount of kids that we have at Barnard and Crandall, and then Whitney and Hazardville. And obviously that's where those buildings are going. But getting back to the conversation we're having about the kids in Georgetown, I think there is more affordable housing in the Crandall Barnard district. You know, in the Till Street area, the Nancy Drive area, where I grew up. Where I live is more affordable housing off the Raffia Road area. So I think that's why it's also more densely populated in those areas. I can attest that there are large families living in smaller homes. And it could be generational families, or it could be, you know, 2 sets of moms and dads with, you know, cousins raising 2 families out of these houses, but there are large families, so. And being on the Board of Ed, like Superintendent Macchio said, we have just seen such a huge influx of kids the last 2 years. And one last comment, we saw the influx of kids with the middle school and the high school. I have no doubt that we're gonna get this passed. And even though it's a long-term plan, I think we are going to see people moving in maybe more gradually, because they're gonna see what Enfield is doing, and we are gonna see an influx of population of kids, even more so than.
Yeah, on his note, I heard you guys say that, and I was just trying to think back. High school opened up 2016?
16 or 17, the fall of 2016.
The numbers are not, they've gone down steadily. So there hasn't been an influx necessarily. Now, that could be an offset of every other option that's out there for kids these days, right? Whether they go VOTEC, Ag-Sci, Magnet, whatever it happens to be.
So we did.
Homeschooling has also gone through the roof.
Right.
And that could be a piece of
I
this.
feel like we saw a decrease in the magnet school kids and an increase in the high school kids for a short period of time when the high school first opened.
Yeah, I'm just
Well, if
according to the
they're
October
home-
1 numbers. It doesn't
Correct me if
look
I'm
that
wrong,
way,
if they're homeschooled and still an Enfield resident, they're counted as part of your outplacements, correct?
No.
You,
If they are a homeschooled
Are
student,
they-
it is
are
literally
they
like the
becoming no
school is
nexus
this.
students then?
No.
Is it like a no?
Homeschool is this.
So it becomes like a no nexus situation where they
They don't exist.
they don't exist.
I can do nothing with them.
They get wiped, their
They're
SAS
wiped
ID
off
gets
of-
wiped out
they're
in the
gone.
record, and
You get put
yeah,
in
that
there.
becomes the black box of not really knowing where.
Exactly. You put a transfer info into homeschooling, and they're off your
I
rolls.
learned something. I never knew how that got processed
And
anymore.
they come back.
Steve, I think,
Unexpectedly.
I think the high school enrollment, the JFK enrollment, I think if you were to compare like sixth graders and then track them when they got to high school, when that opened, that's where we saw the increase. I think the decrease in students has been kind of gradual, but I think if we were to compare like how many of those, that cohort should be attending Enfield Public Schools, and then we looked at the numbers that were coming back from magnet schools.
Yes.
We had a big influx.
When did JFK open up?
Wait,
Never.
Two.
It was right after.
It's like 2 years, right?
22,
4 years ago,
18 months.
Our
I mean, they were
current-
there the whole time.
our current seniors were the class that was there all 3 years of construction and COVID.
Oh, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's been 4 years. This is the 4th school year.
Yeah, and, you know,
Still working on it.
we could kind of go through and unpack. I did pull a lot of different data and I could just keep going. I think a lot of good conversation. And to the point of a lot of communities see a lot of similar situations, especially with extended families and non-family households. And I think it's just a statement of where we're at as state, town, region, nation with housing. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of affordable housing options out there. So I think people are doing what they need to do. But nonetheless, if they're registered within Enfield Public Schools, we're picking them up as part of our analysis. So I think we don't really get into what their individual family situations are and all that. That almost becomes like a very census level residency analysis that is, not something that we typically get into. Looking at the student distribution map, I think this pairs well as you think about population centers. Each dot represents a student, dots are on top of dots, it's the same household, but that gets picked up in the density analysis. So what you can see is that in some of your parts of your community, it's a reflection of your housing, zoning, housing opportunities, density there. And then others, you can see you have large swaths of the town that just don't have a lot of student population, whether those areas are undeveloped, parkland, not suitable for development, industrial, commercial complexes. But it became pretty clear to me when I looked at it that you had certain given population centers within your community. And I looked at some of the historic data as well, and it's kind of been a well-established pattern of development. So I think this is very helpful when you're kind of visualizing where our center's at and where they could be in relationship to new buildings. So I'll kind of leave that out there. We did do the historic trend analysis, and for simplicity, even with the sister schools, I just kind of paired them together to really kind of look at how the catchments, because that's how the catchments are paired. So I paired them together. I do have the individual school data as well. But what we're seeing overall over the last 5 years is that we have declining enrollment. The greatest declines are in Parkman and Enfield Street grouping, right? We have more modest declines in Memorial and Whitney, and a much smaller decline up in Barnard and Crandall of just about 3%. But you look at those catchments over the last 5 years, which is a kind of a good planning tool. You average enrollment up in Barnard Crandall at about 730, Enfield Street Parkman 530, and then Memorial Whitney at about 660. Looking at your historic pre-K enrollment, and this is based on October 1st, the state requires every projection, whether it's 12th grade, 10th grade, pre-K, K, as part of the reporting, everything's October 1st. We understand pre-Ks by a lot of it, especially for your typical, non-typical peers. You have, an identification factor, students with IEP, and some of these programs, and that grows throughout the year. So typically what we'll see is that, the June enrollment will be higher than the October enrollment. That's something to think about when you're doing your facility planning, especially if you want to increase pre-K levels. That's something that we would look to say, the state will look for some rationale to it. It's either going to be program growth. We're going to take advantage of, a birth to 3 program. We're going to take advantage of something that we can then kind of build around. But pre-K, since it's not universal in Connecticut, there's no standard for projecting. It becomes, if you provide it, people will fill out the seats, and that's what I've seen. If you provide seats and you provide the operation for it, pre-K is always full. So as you're kind of going through that and figuring out how best to leverage some of those bonuses and how best to be able to see where those programs would fit within the buildings, that becomes a number that can become a little bit flexible. That's kind of separate from the demographics. Net migration. So what net migration looks at is it looks at your student body from one year to the next. Does that body of students within that given grade grouping shrink or grow? And what we're seeing overall in Enfield is that we have a lot of red on the chart. So we're seeing a lot of out-migration at each of the grade levels for your student body. So in some communities where we see growth from one year to the next, in Enfield, we're seeing an out-migration. So over the decade for elementary, there's been an out-migration of about 12 students annually. That's shrunk a little bit in the last 5 years, where you've had some years that are positive, you've had some years that are negative. So it's like very little change there overall. The middle school has been variable from year to year. Overall, it's been at a positive though, +1 there. Going back a number of years to about 10, 15 years ago, it was negative. High school has stabilized a lot over the last couple of years. We did notice this year out-migration is much higher than it's been. But overall, over the last 5 years, it's nowhere near the levels that you saw 15 years ago.
Now, what would you contribute that to? Them going to trade schools, tech schools, crack, or leaving town, or what would you contribute that to?
Could I do?
Last year's or? the
Can I do
years
D,
prior?
which would be
This
all of
year's?
the, D is all of the above?
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything, I think. Yeah,
That's a lot of kids, holy shit.
and I will also say that this is your unaudited enrollment number from October, so it's not your state audited number. Sometimes when you go back in a year later and you're pulling in a state number, that number will switch a little bit after they go through the audit. So there could be kids included in there or not included in there as part of the whole auditing of, the audit process takes longer than it should. But what it does is sometimes there's different districts claim, especially in high school, they'll claim the same student, right, for funding purposes. So they'll go through that and, it could be part of that auditing of where that student actually is in the
I've never seen
building.
this on paper before. I mean, you already hear about it, it's verbal, but on freaking paper, it's, wow.
Can I ask a quick question about pre-K?
Sure.
Knowing that universal pre-K is a possibility in our state, and I'm thinking that it still kind of is, and you said clearly it will fill the seats, we know it will. Why wouldn't we have some type of projection on this as to what that's going to be, given the fact that it's a really good possibility we're gonna put pre-K in the new schools? I'm just curious, sorry.
Yeah, it's a good
You know what I
question.
mean?
It's a possibility, but it's not a guarantee. It's not by statute yet.
Okay,
They're providing bonuses to test the waters.
yeah,
And then the trouble with universal pre-K is that the way the law is written, it doesn't have to be provided by the public schools totally. There's private providers, there's other providers that receive federal funding for it, the same federal funding that you're competing for.
right,
So we could not put all of the potential pool of students into Enfield Public Schools without recognizing that those private providers that are also seeking funding are identifying the same students as part of their program as yours.
and I might be slightly biased because we have a fantastic school, but at the same time, it's again, one of those thoughts of like, wow, a lot of people are probably going to enroll because of the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just a.
The way it's typically handled and the way we handle it on projects is that it's the commitment in the ed spec to build the classrooms and seats.
Mhm.
That commitment is as good as a projection.
Yeah.
Because they know that it'll fill it out. And I've done some analysis in here where I try to put in like your growing special ed needs and try to give you the background or be able to reference to say, hey, this is why we're adding new seats. We have growing needs, right? And so to give you kind of the solid ice to stand on to be able to go for that. But there's no process for projecting pre-K put out by the state. I work a lot in New Jersey. New Jersey has a process. Here's our standard for projecting pre-K. You have to net out the private provider. You take a percentage of that. It's 0.6 times this number, and we lag the 3 and 4 year olds. So the DOE there got ahead of it and actually says, if you're gonna go to universal pre-K, here's the formula to project. You give us your numbers, based on your calculation. Our state does not have that.
So maybe a year from now, we'll have a different conversation.
But it's still not going to be mandatory for enrollment, you know,
Yeah.
that
It's
state
not man-
mandated age is not changing.
That's not yet, correct.
But they are working towards getting what they're calling LGCs, local governance partners, to do community assessments to understand available seats. And then those people who may have an opportunity can apply for further seats and funding.
Okay.
So it's an expansion across the state, looking at communities, pockets of need, who's interested. And it doesn't fully cover the cost of all things preschool. So that's another further separate conversation, right?
Yeah.
But anyways.
Wow, okay.
You learned pre-K was scary, my kids were pre-K, it was so expensive.
Wait, the
It's like
pre-K
college.
that you're carrying is what, 255?
Exactly.
So that's basically like 75-ish% of your total kindergarten cohort, right?
Very high percentage of.
Yeah, so
pre-K.
it's,
Yeah. Very
that's a
robust
pretty
program.
high, that's a high percentage.
Yeah.
It's across 3, 4, and now 5-year-olds too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I was just taking like a projection for your kindergarten cohort, which is like 330-ish,
Mhm.
and you have 255, so that's.
That's good to know, at least, yeah.
Okay, student immigration. So this is where we look at those state IDs, the SASSA IDs from students, track them back and forth from year to year. This really paints the picture of the in. So I started with this net migration, which is the in and the out. This is where we're focusing on the in. The little black dots represent the last 3 years of data for new to district students. So students that did not have state IDs that were tied to Enfield Public Schools in the past. 21, 22, those numbers were high, above 380. For all of your different grade levels, that began to step down a little bit the last 2 years, and then in 25, 26, down to about 260. The number that changed the most in that was really the elementary, as well as the high school. Middle school stayed a little steadier, but still nonetheless declined, and you can kind of see where those populations are of new students that are moving in that are new to Enfield. This is just a more granular look at it. I like to be able to break it down by the attendance zones to kind of get a familiarity there where we're seeing some of those enrollment pressures from new to district students. That gives us a little idea of desirability and somewhat mobility. So, Whitney Crandall had the highest new to district students at just below 30 historically. We had our lowest at Enfield Street, which was really, about 16 students annually. And then Barnard, Memorial, and Parkman were, right around the same in that low 20 category overall for the 5 years of data that we looked at. Pulling from the state's database, we were able to track back 2006 through 07. Looking at special ed trends, the colored bar chart in that light green is Enfield Public Schools as a percentage basis, overlaid as the state as a whole with that, I guess it's almost like an orange line. But what you can see here is that your percent of students with need is higher than that in the state, and it's increased by almost 10 points since 2006, 2007. So even though you have declining enrollment, your students of need are going up, to your earlier point. We look at historic racial composition, and this report gets issued every spring, so the data on this is through 24-25. But overall, becoming more diverse, looking at about 40% or 39% for 24-25. Back in 15-16, it was right around 27%. Greatest growth is in Hispanic and Latino students, which went up by about 11% over that same period of time. Looking at our ELL or MLL needs, whatever your terminology is locally for those, you can see the shown in that like darker orange color, up 20 based on 24-25, about 4%. Going back to the mid 2000s, 06, at about 1%. Following a similar trend to that of the state, but at a much lower level overall on a percentage basis. Getting into our other public enrollment, so these are Enfield resident students identified in the R2 reporting. There was a lot of schools, so I did the top 10 on this one. The chart on the left shows the aggregate of those. So going back to the onset of the pandemic, about 370 students, that number dropped down to below 300. You had a recent low in 23, 24, and then it went back up. The largest share is that green colored stacked bar chart, that's being the high school population. The elementary's been anywhere between, mid 60s to almost 100. But typically, based on the last 4 years, weeding out that anomalous pandemic year, you're anywhere from the mid 60s to low 70s. And then your top 10 other public schools. Somebody mentioned earlier, the technical schools, bingo, you win a lollipop for that one. As well as some of the magnet schools in the region also falling in there, and then Suffield High School in that red color. Non-public, so this could be private, parochial. We saw a little bit of a mini, not a spike, but kind of your baseline was higher from 2017 through 2019, up over 330 students. And then we saw that number drop off. Over the last several years, it's been around that 250, with the most recent data we had in 24-25 at just over 230. Largest component for that is the elementary, so the collective grouping of K-5 students, about 130 students in that based on the 24-25 data point.
And I just wonder if there's any correlation, because I can't remember when it closed, but St. Martha's school closed. So I wonder if the increase in the other public enrollment correlates to the closing of the parochial school at all.
Yeah, you could clearly see the drop off in this category, but also we didn't really, well, we did a little pickup there, but it's weird because that 2021 could be, that was that one spike and then it went away. It could have been just a reaction to remote learning and pandemic and all the other stuff. So it's too hard to kind of weed out. There's a lot of things, there was a lot of things going on in that year.
Screw you right over. Data-wise, oh my God.
Yeah, there's a lot. We just say that there was a lot going on in that year. And then we move on. All right, getting into our enrollment projections. This is done in accordance with the methodology laid out by the Office of Grants Administration. So, our baseline projections are capturing about 360 new multifamily units over the projection horizon, about 100 single family units. That's why, I kind of beat it to that. That's why we did that. Netting out of the new developments was to ensure that we're not double counting. These are our key assumptions. So if we determine that we're going to have a different pre-K number, we can plug that pre-K number in to provide a new number for that. But overall, this kind of lays out the framework. Surprise, surprise, our high projections use the hybrids that we talked about earlier. I didn't throw a curveball on that one. Medium's medium, low's low. But I think the key here is that looking at that historic in-migration. So that's kind of where everything gets kind of baked into the model. There are a lot of different factors, a lot of different equations, but overall, your historic average over the last 8 years, and we use 8 years because that's the window that the state requires us to give our peak projections in. You've had negative outmigration of just 0.2%. The high model assumes in-migration of 0.2%. So about a 0.5 percentage point swing. The medium model is in alignment with that historic average over the last 8 years, and then we add in the student generation on top of that, and then the low projections, which are always our pessimistic model, is below that historic average. Somebody asked a question again earlier on the high school. We did see outmigration at the high school. I'll start with that little red box on the lower right. These are the persistency ratios from one year to the next. So our transition from 9th to 10th grade and 10th grade to 11th, we're below 0.9. So what a 0.9 is that if you had 100 9th graders and they were to advance to 10th grade at a 0.9 ratio, you'd only retain 90 of them. So in grades where you see it above 1, that's showing that we've had growth in that cohort transition. So where it's, for example, 4 to 5, we saw growth there. of, was slightly over 1. So you had either retention of all those students or slight growth there overall. The estimate of migration, it got cropped a little bit, but it's on the right-hand side. This is where we start to do our calculations on that. You'll see over the last several years, except for in 22 and 23, we had out-migration in our recent history. Out-migration this year of about 0.7%. Our birth decay has been, it was pretty steady for a period of time. Last year, we had a really low birth decay because of the start date change. We lost eligibility on 4 months of births. We thought that would have rebounded in 25, 26, especially when I was looking at it in the summer, something closer to the historic average, but we also saw that that number was a little bit lower for the birth decay there. Getting into our district-wide projections, we started doing high, medium, and low back in when I was young doing this work, and the Great Recession hit, and everybody was wrong. So we were projecting growth. Housing was growing like crazy. Who knew what was happening with mortgages and everything else at the time? Times were great. And then everybody who did enrollment projections was completely wrong in a blink of an eye. So back then we started looking and say, okay, there's external factors here that are well outside of our control. So we're going to do a more optimistic, a baseline, which is typically the medium, and then a pessimistic model. And I think this works out really well, especially when you're thinking about facility planning, because you could kind of begin testing your different schemes against kind of different numbers and say, all right, is it going to work under the most likely? Yeah. Okay, if we get more students because we're building new schools or because whatever's happening in town or whatever policies outside of our town are changing, then we have the high model. So if you can look at a construction program and kind of test against both those numbers and say, does this work? Then you're likely going to be future-proofed, at least what we can see for the foreseeable future under a range of different conditions. And typically with the enrollment projections, the first 5 years are always your most accurate, especially at elementary, because you have real births, where you start having to project births and do estimates on migration and housing. That's when you get further out, and it's almost like the hurricane model. Right, so you start to see that cone of uncertainty growing and growing a little bit. The further the storm is out, we don't know exactly where it's going to hit, but still it gives a good indication of where you're likely going to be. So all the models are pretty good agreement, especially between the medium model and the high model. We're all showing pretty stable enrollment over the next several years. It's really kind of around that midpoint. We have a span of about 250 or so students between those, and that's pre-K-12 with pre-K held constant, and then going out, it broadens out even a little bit more. So even, over the next decade, the high model shows about 2% growth, the medium shows about 3% loss, and then the low model shows a little bit more pronounced decline of just under 10%. What does this mean for K-5, which is really kind of the focus of this committee's work? We're projecting an increase of about 5%. In the near term, in looking at that enrollment where it kind of falls within that 8-year window, and I probably should have put that little 8-year window box on it. So that's important to note that, for a construction grant application, we do 10-year projections just because it's a good window to look ahead for planning. But the state only allows you to use that peak enrollment within that 8-year window. So our 8-year projected peak is 1,974 students in 2033-34, but overall, you're going to average about 1920 students overall. We're projecting a bit of a decline at the middle school. We get to a bit of a low point around the projection midpoint, and then we start to rebound to the levels that we're around today. At the high school, we're projecting a decline throughout the entire 10-year horizon, getting down to just under 1,200 students towards the back half of our enrollment projection. And even though earlier I said for the first 5 years, yep, that's for the elementary school. For the high school, because we have students in seats and we don't see a lot of change other than students opting out, that 10-year window works really well for the high school projections. Looking at how those attendance zones are drawn up and how the grades are grouped, looking at Barnard Crandall over the first 5 years, growth of about 7%. 5-year average of just under 720. Enfield and Parkman, growth of about 4%, averaging about 500 students within that attendance zone. And then for Memorial and Whitney, growth of about 3% overall, averaging about 650 students. This is my kind of takeaway slide. I'm just gonna double check to make sure I probably hit on all those points, and I think I did. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the committee if you guys have any additional questions, and hopefully I just didn't inundate your brains with a ton of information, which I probably did, but the good news is that if you have any questions after you had a chance to digest it, just feel free to reach out. I'm happy to be able to address those. I know I threw out a lot of stuff, a lot of information, and it's really, we live in this world, but we try to distill it down. But also I know there'll be other stuff that'll pop up from it, and I'm happy to be able to address those.
So I have one last question,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Yeah.
So this may be completely outside of the box, but just in my thought process, the fluctuation of possibility of students from like adoptive parents or from foster parents or different things like that. So it just kind of, those kids are within Connecticut or maybe Massachusetts or what have you, but now they're coming into our school system. So is there, I know you talked about like fluctuation and stuff like that. I just didn't know if there was any type of, like you had talked about the formula with that and that possibility happening.
It's not something that we ever really model. We realize that it happens, and it happens in different communities, and there's families in every community that fosters kids. And we just assume that that's something that's just baked into the baseline conditions, but yeah.
Okay,
good point.
cool.
Anyone else?
Great. Wow.
You learned more about enrollment than you ever wanted to know, huh?
No, I want to, but it was a lot. Good job. Wow, all right. So we have no more questions for Mark, or? I mean, Mike?
That's all right, I go by Mark.
It's a lot to absorb.
But no, and seriously, as you guys work through this thing and start digesting stuff comes up, Jeff knows where to find me. Just reach out and happy to help.
Oh, great. Yeah, how yours again?
Can I have my chair back?
I thought I was gonna take it home as a party gift almost. All right, guys, good luck.
Nice job.
Thank you.
All right, now for the second half of the presentation.
You don't give them a break?
No, no breaks.
No intermission.
It's 3:30. No cheese.
We'll lose you.
So I'm just gonna go to,
Cheese.
I'm just gonna go to one slide because it was a lot of info.
Harvey, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Mark.
No, Mark, thank you.
It's close, right?
That's right.
Um,
Yes.
So we're not gonna spend all that much, that was a lot of information, so we're gonna distill it down to bring it back to what we've been showing for a number of students. And so if you take the medium projections and you keep the pre-K at the 255 and you look at a three-school option, so I'm on the far right-hand side here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Thank you, Mike. Three-school is, as projected using the medium, is 747, and the four-school is 560. So in the purple, or yes, a little further down on the far right, three-school, we had just estimated the 785 to 825, and a four-school at 590 to 620. So the good news is that we were slightly above the numbers that we projected for the medium model. The next slide, same concept using the high projection in his model, because I know some folks would ask, the three school is 768, the four school is 576. We're still okay, because we had shown the 785 to 825 and the 590 to 620. So generally speaking, we're on track. The options don't dramatically change. The fine tuning of the building size with the student population and what this committee's comfortable with as far as medium, high, and solidifying the pre-K number. There's nothing in all of the reports and all the information that you provided that causes us to shift gears at all or concern. We're there as far as the options that we're planning, the size of the buildings. They'll be a little bit smaller, slightly modified, but that's all dependent upon the pre-K conversation as well. So to bring it back to what we've been doing, I think we're in a good spot, I guess, in general. So I don't think I'm gonna walk you through the rest of the slides in the interest of time. But I am going to, oops.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you just made a statement that, you know, they're gonna be a little bit smaller, and something that I took from the demographic data, which concerns me, is that over the past 20 years, we've made a lot of adjustments for the numbers of special ed kids coming up, right? Huge adjustments, and offices were closets, and if those, even though we might prepare for what we think we need, there could come a day where we need more, right? Are we taking into consideration how easy it will be for us to adjust from, we have a classroom that needs to be a special ed room, and are we going to be able to make those adjustments easier than we have had to in the past?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the next step in our work is to take the enrollment, and then you plug it into the formula, it's gonna give you the size of the building. That next level is to then develop a basic program behind the total square footage to, in fact, we're gonna talk about, and we have a lot of this information already, how many specialized education spaces, how many intervention, how many coaches. So we're gonna draft up a program for one of these schools to see where that falls compared to the allowable area. So with the percentage of specialized education in the reports that Mike just presented, there may be a need to go above the allowable area in order to get the proper program that we know is not only going to serve the students of today, but also future-proof the building. So that's likely going to be between today and our next meeting. We're gonna mock up those programs, because now it's starting. Now we validated general size. Now we have to validate the program and make sure that we future-proof it. So, you know, not everything's going to be a formula that works out perfectly. My guess is that we're probably going to have to look at the potential for either space waiver or additional area for the specialized education, knowing that where the numbers came back for that percentage population. Does that make sense?
And again, not just to talk about money, but that makes it that much more important for us to get as much reimbursement as we can, because there's some areas that we're all going to agree upon we have to do, but we're not going to be reimbursed on it. And that is one of them. So, you know, that's something I think as a committee, I know myself, a lot of us, it's just what's needed and what's required. And this is, like I said before, it's the only chance to do it. So if we can reap the benefits of reimbursement somewhere else, it'll cover the non-reimbursables that we feel we need to do.
And I know that we're trying to project and we're never going to be 100%. I get that. I'm just thinking, you know, we talked about the numbers changing and, oh, it was smaller once we moved in, all of a sudden we didn't have enough room. So I think about, like this week, I walk into a classroom and say, I might have to change a classroom to a special ed room. And then I look at all the issues of putting in a swing for a special ed OT, and that can't be done in a typical classroom. So are we going to be prepared to make sure those rooms are sustainable for the what ifs if it comes beyond that 10 years, right? That 10-year projection. And we talk about hopefully 50 years, but you do say that if those numbers continue to rise the way they are here, we have to anticipate that we'll have fewer general ed classrooms and more special needs, if that was the case, are they going to be built that we will have the ability to make those adjustments
One
easier?
of the givens that we've been experiencing the last 10 years is that type of program, it's a given it's gonna get worse, or add more, or however you wanna word it. The need's gonna be
Gonna grow.
greater.
Right.
That's a given. I mean, we've never been to a point where it's like, oh, everything's perfect. You know, the world's getting screwed up day by day. So that's something that 100% agree. We're gonna have to anticipate, there's no crystal ball. You know, if we can, again, have extra rooms or different classrooms or something for future layout or, it's a tough call. I mean, and we can only do so much, the state would only allow us to do so much, so that's what I'm saying. We're gonna have to really make a tight choice and say, we're not getting reimbursed, but it's something we need to do. So,
Well, right, I agree. I think two things can be true, right? While our enrollment numbers may be down, the space we need is still going up. So if we have to still build a building that's bigger than our enrollment projection numbers, even at the max, because that's what I would suggest, because that gives you room to either change, grow into, or modify the extra space that we're going to, I'm not the smartest one in the room about this, but that we're gonna need for your special ed and your specialized programming. If the projection starts, then I would still wanna use the highest numbers and probably add on to more of that, because I would rather not be reimbursed than have to try to do an add-on and like that we've had to do to some of these buildings over the last couple of
You were
years.
involved in the last one, JFK.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
we did this projection, we
Yep.
did everything, and we had 5 extra classrooms,
Yep,
and by
and
the
it
time it
wasn't
was built, we ran out of, we were making other classes,
Yep.
you know, the core, we ran out the day we opened it up.
And I'm not talking just classrooms, I'm talking like the support
Support
team.
spaces.
Support,
spaces,
and I'm
yeah.
talking like the supports in the ceilings
Yeah,
that
yeah, the
can't handle the
infrastructure.
medical equipment.
Yeah.
Because the infrastructure itself, if it's not built prior, you can't go back and tear down that and make that happen. You can't just throw up a couple two by fours and say, we got this, because we are liable for the safety. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from the get-go, is to make sure that's done throughout a building as opposed to it's just in these rooms.
Yeah.
Right.
Because let's be real, our what ifs 5 years ago are now
Right.
realities. They
Reality,
have been,
exactly.
so.
You know, one of the good things is by designing a 2-story building, your steel is 60% bigger than it was if it was a roof. So, you know, you're more likely to be able to accommodate that on the first floor using your second floor steel than opposed to a roof, because right there, you're just trying to get a plenum, trying to get ductwork, you're trying to get this, you snow load. So that, I mean, it's hard to put steel where you need it when you're trying to design a structure. But, you know, one of the saving grace, like I said, is, you know, at that point, maybe we can weld an angle or a plate or something at that point, and the structure will still be able to take that load.
I would also say that the due diligence that's being done now supports an argument to the state for a space waiver we've worked with districts where we've gotten both space waivers and the additional 15% reimbursement for specialized education, because the district was able to demonstrate that need within the school project. So we have the argument already baked into the analysis that would support that additional funding and that additional size of a building.
I would think that the district's out of district placement being so much lower than state average would show, like, we don't send kids out because we have the specialized programs here. Specialized programs, as we've discussed numerous times, require larger spaces. So therefore, this isn't just a flat enrollment issue. And I know you guys know this, but I think for everybody else, I think that's the big argument that we make.
And like you're saying, it's the support too, it's not just the
Right.
classroom, it's the, you know, the private area, it's the,
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot to it, so.
So you said, so we had what, 90 some odd new enrollments last year? And then this year, we already have 70, something.
73.
How many, like what age, what grades are those spread out? Have they been over?
I don't have that off the top of my
Really?
head.
Do you see what this guy just did? You know that?
No, I was just wondering, like, if the concentration of them happened to be more like in that K through 5, it's next time. It's everywhere, because I didn't know if that was, if that would have, if the higher impact was more or less than that.
I would say it's elementary and JFK
Okay.
are the vast majority.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's everywhere. I can get it for you.
If it becomes a pertinent issue within this committee, yeah, maybe something we will.
Julie has it.
Yeah,
It's just a matter of I don't have it off the top of my head.
no, that's fine.
I just have been staring at the paper on my desk for the last.
But as an example, I have a program at my school, right? And it's a small classroom, and typically it's 5 to 8 children. We have 11 right now. We started at 7 and we're at 11 since September, right?
Steve, do you know if those numbers represent moving into the town?
Those are new to district. Those are not newly identified.
Right.
New
Those are,
to
for
town.
example, came from Manchester.
Right.
We had one came from Glastonbury the other day. I mean, they're new to the town.
Well, yeah, if you have the programs, they're gonna find it.
And I was just gonna say that, I have a child with special needs, and I will tell you that one of the questions that was asked of me is like, why do you think so many people are coming into Enfield? And I said, because the supports are here. Because that is why people are seeing that we have solid supports here, and they want to bring their kids here that have special needs and are, special education is so strong that they're like, we want to come here for that reason. So it's going to heighten.
I also think though that we live in an affordable town.
Yes, and also, definitely.
So we have affordability, so families can afford to move here.
Yep.
And then we do have strong supports in our schools, so I think it's a twofold.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Steve, if I may ask, so we added 90
Now
students.
you're on the hot
Do
seat.
you feel like it's Monday?
Do you like being in the hot
I feel like nothing's a Monday meeting.
You want to take Jeff's seat?
I'm trying to reconcile the fact that we just said we added 90 students last year and 70 this year, and our enrollment's going down. So
We're adding high needs.
High needs.
We're adding high
But other
needs
students are leaving.
Yes.
So,
I think it's about, you're always gonna have Enfield's gonna be a high migration community, right? You're always gonna have a lot of in and out.
Yeah.
The issue is our out, or the issue is our in that is coming in are much more needy than our outs.
right, but we've been talking about declining enrollment over the last hour, 2 hours, whenever this meeting started, but you're also saying we're getting in an influx of, even if it's just certain students, but we're also saying that enrollment's going down. So I'm just trying to reconcile those two statements.
I think the percentage of those with higher needs is going up.
Right.
So the population is pretty level. It's the exchange, when you exchange the out and the in.
So
But-
people are
but-
changing, but they're.
But it also, that other chart
This one
that
here.
surprised us shows that there's 82 kids leaving the high school this year, right?
It's because we don't have enough chicken restaurants here. Or car wash.
Could be it.
I think that should be a wake-up call to exactly what happens.
I mean, Scott, I think to your point, I think if you, I don't remember where it's
I
at.
can find it, yeah.
It was the,
Oh, right here, I think it's page 20, I can't read that, 23?
Yep.
Right, the 9/12 net migration, there were 80, he's saying 82 kids this year are leaving the high school.
This one?
So, right, and so that,
One more.
no, that's it, it's just that your
Oh, your
bar on the right is covering that. Yeah. That's the one, but, so I believe he pulls all of this based on our October 1 data, right? So there's a number of different factors that go into that. And I have, again, we just submitted the enrollment data. I'll give the enrollment report. It'll be in December now, but if you have a larger class size that's leaving and a smaller class size coming in, from year to year, that's gonna make it look a little bit different. If you have a larger number of kids that are going,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
if you have a larger number of kids that are going to magnet schools or whatnot, I mean, a lot of that's gonna factor in. 82 is a huge number, and it is something that I sent the question to the high school principal, like, you gotta tell me what's going on in terms of where are all these kids going? Some of them are leaving the town, like, they're migrating out of the town. Going wherever it happens to be. I mean, I don't have all the names of it.
Right.
But I think you factor that in with, look at our special education percentage numbers are jumping at an increase that's greater than the state is increasing. So it's a dual factor going on, but I don't have a good handle on where the 82 specifically are going.
No, and I want us to have as many buildings as we can afford, and I want to revitalize this district as far as our facilities, 100%. I'm just saying, for anybody listening out in TV land, we're saying conflicting things, and I'm just trying to reconcile that, that's all. Because we're saying we're losing students, and then we're getting students, and it makes it even harder to project these numbers. And it's hard to do a 10-year projection for humans that aren't alive yet, because we're doing a pre-K through grade 5 building, and if we put the shovel in the dirt tomorrow, they're not born yet. So, I mean,
It was weird being a statistic, I'm just saying, that was thrown in there, and that was really scary to see that number, I'm just, so weird, so weird.
That's all, I'm just saying.
Birth rates and, yeah, that was wild, so, yeah. So that.
All right.
I mean, if the trend continues though,
yes,
sorry, the high school's gonna look drastically different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's under 1,200 kids. And that doesn't happen over 1 year. That's a numbers of years, kids finding other places to go, or the migration issue, or it. I think Andy almost fell off of his seat when we first got this, because he was the high school principal when it was 1,600 kids and it was packed. And he's like, that's not the case anymore.
That's crazy.
as long as we have the data to give these answers, because these are things that people will ask. And
100%.
Yeah.
But we have the data to go for the waivers, which is crucial.
Are the waivers, are the waivers, do they hold the reimbursement rate as well? Do we put the waiver in? Is that reimbursable?
The waiver is a series of questions, and
Okay.
it's determined on that.
So what happens with the waiver is that if you build a bigger building than what's allowed, quote, allowed, it reduces your reimbursement rate by a certain percentage, and there's a calculation of that. So the more you go over your allowable, the ultimately less total reimbursement you get. It's not, they don't just say it's for this area, this room, this wing, you don't get an auditorium, right? So what the waivers do is the waiver says you keep your reimbursement and you're also allowed to build a building X bigger than what's allowable. So now the whole building gets let's just say the 85% reimbursement, right, on the total number, regardless of what the state calculation is for allowable square footage.
so like, for example, we were not able to get reimbursed at the middle school if we had kept the pool, because the pool is not part of the curriculum.
Correct.
So theoretically, if it wasn't a pool, but it was a space that we needed for special ed or something, maybe we get a waiver for that if we could prove it was for that purpose. But you're not gonna get a waiver for a bigger gym, a bigger auditorium without proving why you need it. And we couldn't get that, like couldn't keep the pool at the middle school because it's not part of the curriculum.
Very good. This is awesome. All right, is there anything else you'd like to continue on?
This is I pulled one slide and I won't be long. This was what I thought we had discussed as the direction as the preferred option. The last meeting, we opened the door to revisit maybe the 3 versus 4 and then maybe some other configurations. We're obviously open to exploring whatever options we want to explore. But before we go to the next step in developing, I guess, the programs that I was explaining earlier, it would be great to get some consensus around a general direction. Obviously, we can modify it as we continue to get feedback, but I just wanted to put this up there, I guess.
So, in order, we've been talking, Jeff and I, about, in order for them to basically move on to the next step of detail, of programming, of school size, we need to define if we're gonna go 4 schools or 3 schools. And I think we're pretty much at that point. I know there's a lot of talk, and I'll go around and let everybody speak. I know there's a lot of talk about the reimbursements. There's a lot of talk about the pre-K in every school. There's a lot of talk about preschool, pre-K to separate school. So we've not exhausted, but we've touched upon just about every aspect, pros and cons for each of them. So if there's any questions anybody has regarding, they're not sure on what direction, ask questions now. If not, maybe if you guys want to just go around, if there's no questions on the clarification of the benefits of either or. Are there any questions on that, first of all? Okay. Would the panel members that are right now allowed to vote, like to speak and give their suggestions or what they feel?
I'm sorry, can you just remind me again what was the cost to Enfield or the total cost for the 3 schools? Just so I have those bottom line numbers.
Yep, okay, that may take a second because that's another slide from.
I could actually, you know what, I probably have it in one of my prior packets.
I
I
have
can
it.
probably look that up myself.
Right.
Go for that?
You should have had that ready. Anticipate your questions.
Okay, so with the caveat, let me just put this up on the screen. So this was several meetings back.
Yes, yes. It was
So-
B1 and C1, right?
Yeah,
Those
B1
were
and
the two
C1.
ones? Thank you.
Comparing
Okay.
both together at that point in time.
Yep.
Because the reason why I'm giving you all these caveats is because the enrollment, the population was a little bit different than it is today, those kinds of things. We had totaled up the 3 school option, and each of the buildings, let's just call it, each of the buildings were $21 million each cost to Enfield. 120 to 123 million total project cost. So after reimbursement, about $21 million each. And then we were looking at Eagle, basically at this point in time, we were looking at Eagle at the Enfield Street Elementary School. So when you added all of that up, that was about 400, call it million total project cost, but a cost to Enfield of about 72. And if I go back to this one, and I just want to be careful. Sorry, let's go this way. Easier, yeah, a lot of slides.
You have it at 7700 this one.
Yeah, it is. It's 430 and 77 is the other one.
So, is it
Yeah,
this one?
right there.
So the only caveats that I'll put to, so C1 scenario, about 90 to 98 million, depending on what site, total project costs, about 17 to 19 million per total cost to Enfield for those pre-K to 4 schools.
Because of the reimbursement.
Because of the reimbursement. We had Eagle at Whitney in this scenario, which was a little bit, I think, higher. And then we priced in a little bit more with Stowe. So total project cost was 430 for this one. Total cost to Enfield was 77. So they were more or less very similar,
Okay.
I guess.
More done than this one, B one.
Yeah, this one has a little bit more in it. That's why I'm just, it's obviously the 3-school to 4-school has its own cost, but moving Eagle to Whitney had a little bit different cost model to it, that's all, so.
And just remember too, this is over 8 years, right? So and essentially based on this, if you just split the number in half, the 77 million, you're spending 30 of it, right? Because you're only doing half of the schools first, then you're gonna, phase 2, you're gonna do the second half of the school, so you're only 30 million 4 years in, right? And then you're gonna tap the other 30-ish million for the last 2 years, two and a half years,
Right.
somewhere in there. So it's not, to Randy's point before, it's not that we need a check for 77 million the day after the referendum, right? So it's important to convey that it's 77 million, but it's 77 million over 8 years, and it's going to be spread out. It's not gonna hit all at once. So if people say, what's gonna happen with my taxes? Well, you're not gonna have this giant bump because you're not spending all of that right now. The town's not even gonna draw it from their bonds or you know,
Yeah,
whatever.
they're start paying on the bonds, yeah.
Right, yeah, none of that's even gonna happen. So it will be a very gradual, yes, the number's big, but it'll be a gradual.
8 to 10 years.
Right.
Is that helpful to your question?
Yeah, I just needed to see numbers, because I wasn't here at the last one.
What is the Band-Aid amount?
Mhm.
Like the amount that John always, and this
Oh, we
was, I
have
know,
that too.
5 years ago. But
Yeah.
what was that amount that we looked at forever ago, to just fix, to do
All right,
nothing?
so I
The
don't-
do nothing
Option
fix, it was the do nothing one?
So-
It was over the 77, wasn't it?
It was like 120,
That's what I thought.
Because there
So,
was no, I was
There's
there
no
for that meeting,
reimbursement.
there was no
It
reimbursements,
was
there was
pre-
like nothing.
Right, it was
But like, those are the
projected
comparison
at
numbers that
110.
need to go out.
I don't know what,
5 years ago,
Let
yes.
them grab it.
yeah, I don't know what John had presented, but this slide here, the left side, I put this together based on some of the comments, actually from the last meeting. The report on the left-hand side, the background of the information on the left-hand side is not our work, it's from the last report. So we went in and looked at just to fix the items that they identified. And I think we used, this was Parkman as the example. It was 6 million just to fix the immediate things that were identified, no programmatic improvements. So then the chart here is we took all of those numbers from that report and pulled them, and it was around round numbers, about 43. If you escalate it just to today's dollars, you're talking in the 55 to 61. And this is, I just want to be clear, this is not like new floors, new ceilings, it is just,
It's maintenance.
it's the fixing the items that were there. And that, if the community chooses to do that, you're likely not getting reimbursement on pretty much all of those,
I
if
don't
that's the
think
way.
this
to-
committee is interested in that. at all.
It also does not include making everything ADA compliant. It
No,
does
this
not.
is
Yeah, this is
just
bare
fixing the
minimum.
mechanical system, the roof, the
This
windows.
is what, when we presented it to town council, when I first started here, thanks for having me do that, 2 months on the job. What I referred to as lipstick on a pig.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I know.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, okay.
And so you're looking at anywhere from 55 to 65 million dollars of non-reimbursable the taxpayers' money. And you're just fixing the issues. You're not expanding, you're not getting new IT, you're not getting new floors, paints, chairs, nothing.
So is there a number that includes the ADA compliance
So,
and the
yeah.
other things? Because I think that's the one that also needs to
So-
be spoken about.
So I didn't add them up for all the buildings, but if you were to take each of the buildings, and I'll give you an example, each of your existing elementary schools and say, okay, we need to address all of the interior architectural finishes, accessibility, those kinds of components. We've seen those, all of that about in that 275 to 325 a square foot range. That's fixing what you have as it exists today and changing out things like millwork because you need proper heights, you need proper, the plumbing. So just that architectural component on, I should be clear, it's all the exterior kind of envelope, but also the interior accessibility compliance. That's about $275 a square foot. So this example on the far right is if you were to basically go through the building and refresh all of the systems that you need, but not address any of the program, you're gonna spend in one building in Parkman, you're gonna spend about 36 to 43 million. And those are real numbers. Those are today's dollars.
Oh, yeah. And that's one building.
Wait, that's one building.
And that's one building.
And
So
that's not even our worst, that's not even the worst one.
That's not even the worst.
That's why when we got as far as we got the last time around, our last number was 110.
oh, yeah, it could very easily be up in, over the $100 million mark.
Yeah, I mean,
Non-reimbursable. 110.
Some of these will be, they'll call them non-priority projects, like your roofing gets some reimbursement, but it's gonna be, your effective reimbursement rate's gonna be dropped from what we're presenting, like in the 70s and 80s to maybe the 50s. I don't know what you got in your roofs, but there's a lot of like ineligibles that drop that
Because it's stuff that should have been done that wasn't, so they're not gonna pay you to not do your job, so now you're down in a 40% reimbursement.
So does
So
that,
essentially, it's just saying, we're
Right.
fixing what we have now for what we have now and nothing for the future.
that was the ask, yeah, to price that out.
And I just asked because when we talk to people and when we start sharing information and getting, these are the numbers, the comparison numbers that they need to see.
And that's why most communities, when you have buildings of this vintage that need this kind of work, enter into either a comprehensive renovation program or a replacement program. I mean, the math is just, that's the way, some of these things work.
And this will be all, and we're gonna be doing slides that show numbers too, when we start doing presentations to the public, educating them, but we can't do these numbers until we have a direction. So that's kind of where we need to go right now, is get the direction, then he can do the hard numbers and show. So, I guess whoever wants to start, if you want to start with.
I mean, I've always been a four-school proponent. I don't love or like at all the idea of almost 800 kids in a building.
So C1.
C1,
Okay.
yes.
Just confirm. Thank you.
C1.
I'm with that C1 with 4 buildings.
Yeah, me as
You
well.
guys?
I'm going to defer to the staff, teachers, and end users, but I will say from the town side, my two concerns are that it passed the first time, because we have one chance to do it, and that, yeah, and it has to be one referendum, not multiple. One, that's it, one number. But I will defer to if C1, if that's what the staff and teachers think, then that's what I would go with. C1.
I do marketing.
It's true. Good. Yeah.
C1.
C1, okay. All right, I'm same thing, C1, so,
I'm also C1.
Everybody does my
you're voting.
But we're not voting.
We already have an hour.
I would literally.
All right, so this is the direction we're gonna ask you, if you can please, now let's focus that way.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I know it's been a long evening, so real quick.
It is what it is, it has to be done, so.
I think most of the folks participated in the think tanks or heard what we, some of the workshops that we did earlier today. Went really well, good feedback and comments. We'll document, record this, and publish a PDF so that you kind of know the net takeaways. But I thought there were some that were familiar faces, some that were new, and I think some comments that are tangible to help us refine the details and the options. So I thought it was a good session, so I will leave it there. Please, if you could promote this, the virtual, I know this time of year is very busy, but December 17th is a virtual community conversation, so we plan to basically go through the history of how we arrived at where we have with the planning options and talk a little bit more about the future and magnitude of the project, but also the schedule for the project. So participation would be great. We'll record it and post it. For those that weren't at the last meeting, we consolidated the community conversation number 1 questions. I think it would be a wise idea to start collecting a frequent FAQ for the website so that if people have some simple questions like, you know, what is the reimbursement or when is this going to happen, or we'll be able to post these and put them in categories. So we'll work with the district on that. Activity books are out. I haven't seen any come back yet, but I think I've heard that it's some people that are taking them. So hopefully we can get some back. Survey from the first community conversation is still open. We have 93 responses. Just reiterating some of the conversations we've already had. We'd obviously like to get that to be, typically for a community like this, we want to see on our next survey about 300 or 300 to 400. So
I just reposted that survey again this evening to all school PTO social media pages as well as through Enfield PTO. So I put that out again tonight with a deadline of December 5th.
Awesome. So now that we have more definitive, tangible pieces for people to react to, or we'll prepare another community survey. That's when I expect to get that number of results. So I think that's.
I just had one other thing about that, and I spoke to you about it. Just my thought with the think tanks, I think this was amazing. I wish I could have gone to it. But my thought was this: what were like the children ages for the parents that were there? Because in reality, my kids are 10 and 7. They're not going to see new schools. They're going to go to JFK and then the high school, which is fine. And I think everybody should have an input on it. There's no question about that. But getting back to the parents that are probably first graders, kindergartners that are going to see this change happen with redistricting and stuff like that, I would hope that there's some type of kind of push out to them in some sort of way to get them, or even the pre-K kids, you know what I mean?
Once, now that we know the direction, we just have feasible information, the package can start running once we get this to the next slide 6 level.
But that's even pushing out this virtual meeting on the 17th.
Right.
To those exact people.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely.
you know, the more people that can get notice of of the virtual meeting, right, making it easier for everybody to attend, the better.
Yeah.
And then they have the option of taking the survey at the end of that as well.
You're good about that, posting it in the parent square, making sure that's put out, right?
You push
You're
my.
good at some things, I guess, right? Give yourself some
A
credit.
little bit of offense to that. I don't know how to work a computer.
All right, so,
But yes, let's.
okay, we have the direction we're going. We're trying to get all the information up to the next meeting, which is December 17th, that's the virtual. We have some business to do here. So we're gonna move on the agenda. So Tina, can you?
Can I make a motion to approve the Tecton invoice number 48616 for the pre-ref services, 55% for $100,238?
Or I just missed it.
Second.
All right. So,
Who's second?
Not
I did.
Christine.
the second, okay, so the description, basically, this is their first invoice, and they've been doing it for almost 7 months now. They're at 55% completion of their contract, and they're just looking to get some kind of payment on it.
This isn't fun enough.
We have a second, so it's a show of hands all in favor, anybody against, anybody abstain, unanimous? Okay, thank you very much.
I love Randy's votes.
The next thing we need to talk
They're all
about,
unanimous.
the next thing we need to talk about is the next meeting. Since we are doing the third,
12:10 is what I have.
so we have December 10th as our next one. Right?
Yeah, 12:10.
Yeah, at 12:10, okay. So everybody okay with 12:10? Because that's when it is. All right, so,
Back to 6 o'clock, right, Randy?
yes, 6 o'clock, hopefully here. The agenda will go up, but hopefully we'll do it here, because this way we can televise it. Committee members, liaisons, and committee members, anybody have any comments they want to make? Anybody have any good to the order, anything good news they'd like to share?
I have good news I'd like to share. So first of all, you're all invited to Chicago Sam's, where I'll be the celebrity bartender.
Tonight,
Yeah, from here, we're all gonna follow each other there.
we're carpooling,
Yep, work hard.
We're carpooling.
Jeeva's my driver.
following each other there.
Oh, yeah, so also last night was our last Board of Ed meeting. So I made an announcement that my daughter accepted early admission at Quinnipiac, and I misspoke. She's actually going to be in the diagnostical medical sonography program at the School of Health Services.
She totally
I said
called
School
you
of
out,
Medicine,
didn't she?
and I misspoke, so I do have to sure.
Good job, Lauren.
She'll perform a future MRI for me when I lose my mind.
When?
Thank God.
Officially.
All right, anybody else? Anybody care to make a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to Sam's.
Second.
Is there a second? All in favor,
It's a
show of hands.
motion.
Everybody against, anybody abstain. Thank you so much, everybody.